lot of people say to swing level, which isn't too bad. Others say to swing down at the ball, which I think is real bad. But to me, the ideal swing has always been one that was slightly up, slightly up. The reason I say that is because the pitcher throwing the ball to the plate into the strike zone is delivering the ball at somewhere from 4 to 8 degrees of angle. I think it makes sense to think that if you swing in the opposite plane in which the ball is being pitched from, that your chances of making contact are much greater.
Sorry to interject real quick. We're having a little bit of technical difficulties. Paul, do you have anything plugged into your computer microphone by any chance? Looks like we're unable to hear you right now.
Someone else needs to jump in. Maddie, run the show.
So in the event, hi Maddie, and good evening everybody. Welcome to the Great Fenway Park Writers Series. My name is Gordon Eads. I'm the historian for the Red Sox. Paul Bogosian, my colleague on the steering committee for the Fenway Park Writers Series, evidently is having some technical difficulties. So it is my pleasure to introduce Dick Flavin, the poet laureate of the Red Sox, who is going to start us off this evening.
They float through the air with the greatest of ease, those launch angle fly balls up there in the breeze. They've caused a pandemic of home run disease. They've brought every pitcher right down to his knees. The ball is more lively, the bats make it fly. Singles, for one thing, might just up and die. Home run disease could take over the scene unless someone somewhere invents a vaccine. Back to you.
Appropriate for the year of the vid, right? The year of the COVID, a little vaccine action from Dick Flavin. Thank you, Dick. It is now my pleasure to introduce our special guest this evening. He is the national baseball reporter for the Wall Street Journal. His name is Jared Diamond, and he wrote the book that we're going to be discussing this evening called Swing Kings, the Inside Story of Baseball's Home Run Revolution. There he is. You know, the first secret to a successful author is that he has a book in his hand, a hawk, you know. Jared, thanks for being with us tonight. And, you know, beyond your professional interest in the topic, you had a personal stake in learning about the mechanics of a baseball swing. Take us back, please, to Dean Field and that 15-year-old at Scarsdale High School in Westchester County, New York, who practically grew up with a bat in his hands.
I will do that, but I do want to just quickly jump in with what I think Paul was trying to say when we couldn't hear him about that clip we saw at the top. I assume most people in this audience know who that was, but it was probably a little weird seeing him wearing a Texas Rangers uniform. But that was Ted Williams, the greatest hitter of all time, the most famous Red Sox of all time, while he was managing the Texas Rangers, sort of introducing the topic of Swing Kings, probably the godfather of the modern swing. I'm sure we'll talk much more about Ted Williams as the night goes on. But just go back to when I was a kid. I, obviously loved baseball growing up. All I wanted to do was play baseball, and I was okay. I wasn't really that good. I mean, I tried really hard to be good, but I had some physical limitations that kept me from really soaring. But I was an okay hitter. I would hit some singles and doubles, never hit for much power. I could make contact, put the ball in play, except for one day. I was 15 years old. It was a normal summer afternoon, morning, get to the field, feels like any other day. I'm batting in my customary 5-6 spot in the lineup where I usually belonged. And for some reason on this day, my first at bat, I get up there, swing the bat, ball hits bat, and it just goes, explodes off the bat to places I never hit the ball to ever before in my life. Absolute bomb, farthest ball I ever hit in my life. And I, end up getting back to the dugout after that at bat and go, what was that all about? But I kind of enjoyed it. Come back up for my second at bat. I think I hit that one even farther. Ended up hitting 3 consecutive massive bombs to right field, one after the other on that day. Anyone who saw me that day would have thought I was really going somewhere in baseball. And of course, I was prepared to continue my life as a Ruthian slugger after that. And of course, it never happened again. Never hit a ball that far again any other time in my life. Sort of made it my quest to try to recreate that day. Never figured out what the problem was, but I think what I came to realize was something about my swing that day was different. And as I started working on this book, I started maybe uncovering some of the secrets that I accidentally unlocked that one day.
So that became your holy grail, to recreate that swing that produced 3 swings that made you feel like you were the next Babe Ruth coming out of Scarsdale.
Yeah, wouldn't that be nice? But yeah, that is really what it was. I spent the rest of my high school career playing baseball, trying to recapture that, never did. Even as I got older and was playing, rec league softball, I'm the captain of the Wall Street Journal softball team in a, beer media softball league where I'm okay. I'm a pretty good hitter, but can I recreate that? No, I just have never been able to. So all of a sudden, when I start seeing in Major League Baseball, guys hitting these prodigious bombs, hitting the ball in the air, working with some fascinating people to sort of teach them a new way of swinging, it sort of occurred to me that was probably what I did that day. I was swinging a different way. I wish I had known that when I was 15.
So we'll leave Jared Diamond, aspiring slugger, behind us and go to Jared Diamond, intrepid reporter. And Jared, there have been various explanations why there have been an explosion in home runs. Back in the 90s, in the turn of this century, it was all about steroids and players showing up at the ballpark with, really cartoonish, freakish muscles. Then MLB implemented drug testing, but the home runs continue to fly. And then you start hearing, well, maybe the baseball is juiced. Last season, and you note this in the book, 6,776 home runs were hit, or 1 every 24.6 at-bats. That's over 1,000 more home runs than were hit in 2000, which was the height of the steroid era, and almost double the number of home runs hit in 1990, which is just 30 years ago. To me, that's mind-boggling. So that brings me to a central character in your saga named Craig Wallenbrock. How did a self-described pot-smoking hippie from Southern California who quit San Diego State's baseball team, before playing a single game, help to shape the home run revolution to the point where he even got his own nickname, the Oracle of Santa Clarita?
Well, Craig Wallenbrock, it might be the single most fascinating person I've ever met, not just in baseball, maybe anywhere. This guy's life is it is completely mind-boggling what he went through. Craig Wallenbrock grew up, he was born in the 40s, went to college in the 60s, late 50s into the 60s, has an opportunity to play for San Diego State, like you mentioned, ends up quitting the team before a single game. After one semester, that fall semester, he becomes sort of just disillusioned with the world. It was the heart of the Vietnam War. He became very political. He sort of became a hippie and sort of just said, I'm done with all this, moved down to the coast, surfed all day, smoked pot all night, and that was just his life for years. Left baseball behind. And he was a pretty good player as a kid, just all sort of self-taught on the mean streets of Pasadena, California. But you would never think this would be the person who would have this outsized role in impacting a generation of sluggers, generations now at this point. He ends up getting back into baseball about a decade later because of his brother. He had a younger brother who was about 10 years younger, who was now playing high school baseball, and he needed some help. So he went to his older brother and said, you're the best baseball player I ever knew. Even though you quit, you were still as good as anyone I ever knew. So could you work with me? Craig said, no, sure, but I don't know anything. I failed as a baseball player. So what they ended up doing was really radical at the time, which is Craig Wallenbrock decided to buy a video camera, not an iPhone video camera. This was, in the 60s, it was some gigantic thing that was probably the size of your refrigerator, probably cost like, the amount of his rent. And he started filming every swing. He started throwing batting practice to people he knew in the neighborhood, great players, even some major league players that he knew growing up who would come back to Pasadena in the off-season training. He would throw them BP and I'd, hey, can I videotape your swing? And he would do that. And then he would talk to them, say, hey, so I watched your swing on video. That alone was radical at the time. The idea of watching video of a swing, while ubiquitous today, in the 70s was insane. No one did that. In fact, it was discouraged. Great hitters would say, oh, I don't need video. I know what I do. I'm a great hitter. I know exactly what I'm doing. And Craig Wallenbrock would ask these guys, hey, so what are you doing with your shoulder? What are you doing with this? What are you doing with that? And they would say, I don't do that. And he would say, well, it's right here on the tape. And they would say, oh, I don't need the tape. So Craig Wallenbrock had the radical idea of, okay, we're not going to listen to what you think you do. We're just going to watch what you're actually doing on this video. And he started realizing that what he was taught his entire life as a hitter, which was to swing down, swing level, swing through the ball, hit the top of the ball, was wrong. And what great hitters actually did was swing up, as Ted Williams talked about. They hit the bottom of the ball. They tried to hit the ball in the air. And once that light bulb hit, it started this incredible pathway to Craig Wallenbrock eventually having the opportunity to work with sluggers that you certainly know, guys like Ryan Braun, Chase Utley, Michael Young, and ultimately the person who made him famous, JD Martinez. And Craig Wallenbrock turned out to be the person instrumental in turning JD Martinez from sort of a fringe outfielder on the verge of being out of baseball to being typically, not this year, but typically the slugger that we all now know.
So here's what I wonder about, Jared. There are roughly 1,200 players, right, give or take, on 40-man major league rosters. To have your name on a roster means that you have demonstrated that you belong to an elite. You are one of the best baseball players on the planet. How do you convince such a player that everything he has been doing up to that point was wrong? Especially when the guys who are telling you that you're wrong are guys like Craig Wallenbrock or swimming pool contractors, the owner of a billiards hall, or a guy from Nashua, New Hampshire, Bobby Tewksbury, who was a pretty good player at the University of Vermont, but washed out in independent ball, playing around here in Lynn and in Worcester. How does a guy like Bobby Tewksbury convince a big leaguer like Josh Donaldson that he can help him, and then does exactly that?
It's very hard. And I think what the players who've had success remaking their swings, the JD Martinez's, the Josh Donaldsons, the Justin Turners, who really reshaped his career with Doug Latta, I'm sure someone will talk about. The one thing that I found they all had in common was they reached a point of complete and utter desperation. JD Martinez had just been cut by the Astros. Justin Turner had been cut by the Mets. These were guys that were on the way out. They had made it to the major leagues on the back of sheer athleticism, of desire, of drive. You need those things. Technique is not everything. You need some natural gift that most of us don't have, that JD Martinez had, the incredible hand-eye coordination, speed, and strength. But he realized finally that it wasn't working. When you get to that place where you see your career flashing in front of your eyes and you're done, that you're not going to get another chance, suddenly the idea of trying something new and different and radical doesn't seem quite so crazy. Now, not everyone reaches that point. I think of someone named Lars Anderson, who played for the Red Sox, actually, not too long ago. He wrote a fascinating story for The Athletic, maybe a year ago, 2 years ago now, where he talked about going to work with Craig Wallenbrock. He had a very tough season, and he was told, hey, this guy, Craig Wallenbrock, could help you. He could help you fix your swing. He went to see him. He didn't have success. He ended up getting cut very quickly the next year, and his career fizzled out. But what Lars Anderson wrote was that even when he went to see Craig Wallenbrock, he never was able to get past that I am a better hitter than Craig Wallenbrock ever was, and that how could this guy actually have something to teach me? And that's a big mental hurdle to jump over. And it's a mental hurdle that JD Martinez did jump over right away. When JD Martinez went to go see Craig Wallenbrock, what he said to him was, I am in your hands. I will do anything you want. I am a complete lump of clay, and mold me however you see fit. Now, JD Martinez had some real epiphanies before that. He had a teammate with the Astros named Jayson Castro, who's still playing. He's on the Angels right now, who's having a great season, who was working with Craig Wallenbrock, where JD Martinez was struggling with his old swing. And he goes to Jayson Castro and says, how are you doing this? And he said, I have this guy in California. It's a little weird, but if you're willing to take a shot at it, I think he could help you. And it's a credit to JD Martinez to be so willing to take that leap, because not every player is. And for certain players, it's had an incredible impact on their careers.
I mean, Jared, you and I have both seen it, in my previous incarnation as a baseball reporter and all. I mean, we see a lot of players who push back against advice from the more traditional batting coaches, who are telling them, you've got to change this or that. And they're saying, well, wait a second, this is how I got here. And now you want me to change mechanics?
That was something JD Martinez experienced directly with the Astros. In his final year with the Astros, their hitting coach went to him around 4th of July before a game in Arlington, Texas, and said to him, you got to make some changes. What you're doing isn't working. You're not going to succeed if you don't make changes. And JD Martinez's first instinct was no. It was, who are you to say I need to make changes? This is the swing that made me a star in college. This is the swing that got me drafted. This is the swing that got me to hit like 320 in the minor leagues. JD Martinez was a stud in the minor leagues. So JD Martinez believed, I'm just going through a tough time. I got to get used to major league pitching. I've always been able to work out on my problems before. I'll be able to work them out again. And who are you, Astros hitting coach? You never played Major League Baseball. You were never even close to the hitter that I was. So how could you help me? It took months after that before JD Martinez was really mentally able to realize that he needed help. And again, not every player is able to do that. There's a lot of egos, and you need an ego. You cannot make it to Major League Baseball if you don't have that attitude, if you don't believe that I am the best hitter in the room every single time I walk in. You don't make it to the major leagues without that. So it does take real internal strength to, for that first time, acknowledge I need help.
So Jared, let's take a moment and step back, just like you do in the book, and give us a brief history of the swing. I mean, how were players, and you alluded to it, you touched on it already briefly, but how were players originally taught to swing? How did Ted become an outlier from the traditional approach? And why did it take decades before someone realized that Ted was onto something?
You got to go back to the very, very beginnings of baseball. When baseball started, it was a very different game. The whole idea of baseball was different. Stadiums were different. The baseball was different. It wasn't designed to fly. It wasn't designed to travel. It was softer. It would get beaten up and scuffed up. At some point in the early part of baseball, if you caught the ball on a bounce, you were out. There was a real incentive to not hit the ball in the air. In the early days of baseball, the incentive to hit the ball on the ground and use your speed. And you were able to guide the ball like a tennis player because pitchers didn't throw as hard. You were able to tell the pitcher exactly where you wanted the ball pitched. And that's what gave rise to guys like Ty Cobb, the best early baseball hitter who treated hitting like an artist. It was about guiding the ball, placing the ball, hitting the ball where they aimed, something which you cannot do today with the ball traveling 100 miles an hour and sliders that defy the laws of physics. And back then you could. And that sort of stuck. That became the way baseball was played. Babe Ruth comes along and starts to change that. He says, I'm not doing that. I want to hit the ball as far as I possibly can. And a lot of people in that time, in the 20s, thought Babe Ruth is going to ruin baseball. He's just a brute. It's just about
including Ty Cobb, right? I mean, wasn't Ty Cobb one of his bigger critics?
Ty Cobb, I can't say hated Babe Ruth personally. I have no idea how he felt about the man personally, but thought that Babe Ruth is bad for the game, that he was taking away from the elegance, from the aesthetics of baseball. There's a great story that may not have actually happened, but there's a famous story about Ty Cobb where when Babe Ruth was sort of in the height of his powers, Ty Cobb, before a doubleheader, went to a sports writer who we got along with and said, I'm going to show you that Babe Ruth guy isn't always cracked up to be. He hit 5 home runs in one doubleheader, 5 home runs in one day. Now that really did happen. He did hit 5 home runs in one doubleheader. Ty Cobb was not a home run hitter. The story goes that he called that shot just as a way to show people that Babe Ruth wasn't all that special. But that was sort of the thinking. Even after Babe Ruth, still the idea, hit the ball on the ground, run, use your speed. That's the way baseball is played. And therefore, the way the swing was taught was swing down, hit the top of the ball. Maybe it was swing level, but really it was swing down. I think anyone that played Little League really ever was probably taught to swing down on the ball. Ted Williams was the first real person to say that's wrong. Ted Williams believed that the ideal swing was up, like we saw in that clip. He hit the ball in the air he tried to pull the ball on every single swing because that's where he knew power was. And he realized, hey, singles are good, but home runs are way, way better. In 1970, 50 years ago, Ted Williams wrote a book called The Science of Hitting. It's more like a manual. It's like a how-to. It was Ted Williams giving people the answers to the test. And in that book, he wrote that you were always told the ideal swing was down, but that's wrong. The ideal swing is up. He wrote that book right around the same time of that clip when he was managing the Rangers. I think it might have been the same year, in fact. And even though Ted Williams said that, nobody really listened for a long time. And there's a few reasons.
Doesn't that baffle you, Jared, given the fact that, Ted, you could make the case, was the greatest hitter who ever lived? He would certainly make that case. Yeah. Why didn't more people endorse his approach? I mean, you still had in the 80s, you had people like Charlie Lau and Walter Renegade, who was a coach here in the 80s, who were still espousing swinging down on the ball.
So the rise of Charlie Lau and Walter Renegade is a factor. Charlie Lau was the first celebrity hitting coach, really like the first modern hitting coach with Charlie Lau. And he was famous, and he had some famous disciples, George Brett being the most well-known. I mean, Wade Boggs had great success with Walter Renegade. Some really great players worked with Charlie Lau, who taught a really traditional swing down approach. Ted Williams had a few things that were going against him. One of them was this idea, I called it the sort of he's a freak syndrome, which is people saw Ted Williams and said, okay, well, that might work for you, but you're Ted Williams. You're the greatest hitter ever. You have 20/10 vision. Mere mortals like us cannot do what you do. And there is some sort of evidence of that. I talked to people that played for him when he was a manager with the Senators and then ultimately the Rangers. And I asked these people, how did he teach you? Like, did he ever get frustrated? How did he teach you how to hit? And what I heard time and time again was Ted Williams' approach to teaching hitting was picking up a bat and saying, do this. And the other hitters would go, I can't do that, man. You're Ted Williams. You have to show us how to do it. So while he was a great hitter, he wasn't necessarily a great teacher. His personality, I think any Red Sox fan that saw him would know, a little rough around the edges, not exactly sort of the softest personality, not someone that was maybe interested in the gentle touch that sometimes teaching requires. I think it's a great lesson that teaching and playing, not necessarily the same skill. It's a lesson that Major League Baseball has only learned in the last few years.
Jared, what do you think? I mean, beyond, setting aside the fact that they may be in agreement philosophically, what do you think Ted would have made of these guys who came out of non-traditional baseball backgrounds and had such an influence on the way the game is played?
That's a great question. I want to believe that Ted Williams would have had an open mind, because Ted Williams, especially for a baseball player at the time, very scientific approach, right? His book was called The Science of Hitting, which sort of stands in counterpart to Tony Gwynn's book, The Art of Hitting. I think that really shows you how Ted Williams viewed his craft, not as art, but as science. I would like to think that the rise of data and the rise of technology was something he would embrace. Because what's so fascinating about Ted Williams is he came to the same conclusions that so many modern coaches came to, except all those coaches had the benefit of high-speed video and wearable devices and motion sensors and all these things that sort of proved empirically what great hitters did. Ted Williams just knew it in his bones, which I think is remarkable. So I would think Ted Williams would like to know that a lot of what he believed with his intuition in the 70s and before that was actually true, and there's data to prove it.
You know, we made it, and I think you probably noticed, Jared, when I was advertising this program, I promised people that we weren't going to get bogged down in discussion of metrics and launch angle and exit velocity and all of that. But one thing that struck me in your book is that you mentioned that a number of the hitters who, even though they give credence to these things and are guided by launch angles and all, they don't like to talk about it either.
No. The hitters who've had great success doing this, the JD Martinez's of the world, never talk about launch angle. And the coaches that espouse this philosophy never talk about launch angle. And it's actually a source of real frustration for these people who are constantly told, oh, you're just a launch angle guy. And it's said sort of very dismissively. The reason is that people don't really understand launch angle. It really isn't that complicated. Launch angle is not new. Every ball that has ever been hit in the history of Major League Baseball had a launch angle. All it is how the ball came off the bat. Now, we couldn't measure it till 2015, but it's not some crazy radical concept. And yet it sort of become this boogeyman for everything wrong with baseball, that it's just guys trying to hit for launch angle. And that's looking at it the wrong way. If you are swinging well and hitting the ball hard and having success, you will have a good launch angle, because if you're hitting the ball hard and hitting the ball in the air, guess what? You're going to hit a lot of home runs. You're going to have a lot of doubles. The launch angle is the product. No good hitter is chasing launch angle. No good hitter says, my goal is to improve my launch angle. No, the goal is to make your swing better. The goal is to hit more balls in the air and drive the ball with authority. And if you're doing that, the launch angle sort of will go with it. Now, there are some hitters in Major League Baseball who sort of on their own have tried to sort of do what JD Martinez did by improving their launch angle. And some of them really didn't have success. I don't want to name any names, but I think there's at least one American League East player, not on the Red Sox, on another team, who we might be able to think of, who may have had this problem and sort of is now really, really struggling after having success earlier in his career, because he didn't do it the right way. He was just chasing launch angle. I just think launch angle has become this sort of catch-all phrase for people that are sort of who don't like change or don't like sort of where baseball is going, to say, well, it's the fault of launch angle, this measurement that really isn't anything too bad.
All right, so presumably we've satisfied that portion of our audience that did want to hear a little bit of a discussion of launch angle and exit velocity. But now I want to do a little segue to certainly one of the more unusual, fascinating, possibly bizarre characters that you write about in this book, a guy who is known as Teacher Man, Richard Schenck, former social studies teacher, insurance man, and bartender, who helped turn Aaron Judge, of all people, into a monster, but along the way made himself kind of a reviled figure on the internet. Share with us his story.
Richard Schenck. Oh, goodness. That was the biggest challenge of working on this book, was trying to figure out what to do with Richard Schenck. I had never heard of Richard Schenck until, it's funny, I think it was the night before. This is sort of a how the sausage is made anecdote, a little aside. I had already submitted my book proposal. It was the night before I was having my meetings with various publishers to potentially buy the book. That night, literally that night, but right before I went to these meetings, Aaron Judge, who just had an unbelievable season in 2017, finished second in MVP at like 52 home runs, at the time was a record for a rookie. He tweeted a picture of him with Richard Schenck, only called him Teacher Man, didn't even use his name, and called him a career changer and said, "You completely made me the hitter I am today." So of course, when I saw that tweet, I said, well, I have something I could talk about in these meetings tomorrow that's not in the proposal. Aaron Judge is like part of the movement. I had no idea who Richard Shank was at the time, but I would find out. Richard Shank is sort of the black sheep of the independent hitting community. He is a professional bartender, owner. He owns a billiards hall in St. Louis, but he's really also a professional internet troll, in addition to everything else.
Is there such a thing as a professional internet troll, Jared?
It seems to be working more or less okay for Richard. Richard got his start in the hitting world. He was just a dad who had a couple sons who were struggling at baseball. He wanted to help them get better. So he took to the magic of the internet, something that Craig Wallenbrock didn't have access to when he was just starting out. And, you know, on the internet, there's a whole subculture of people talking about radical ideas about hitting, all these message boards and chat rooms, really crazy places. Some of these arguments still exist on the internet. They get pretty brutal, mostly just parents arguing with each other about the swing. But it actually was a place for sort of creativity and being willing to try and discuss things that were sort of too extreme for sort of the mainstream baseball world. Well, Richard Shank became an enemy of all of these people because he was really mean. He would criticize people's kids to their face. He would call people idiots and losers. You know, he would not shy away from just saying what he thought about everybody, which is everybody was wrong and only he was right. So eventually Richard Shank said, you know what? I'm not listening to any of you. Here's what I'm going to do. Barry Bonds is the best hitter in baseball at this time, maybe the best hitter of all time by some people's calculations, an incredible player. Steroids or no steroids, still a great player. So Richard Shank basically set up a shrine to Barry Bonds in his basement. He started watching every single at-bat of Barry Bonds that he could, and he would then film himself swinging the bat, and he would sync it up to Barry Bonds, and he would keep doing this over and over again for years and years until his swing, in his mind, resembled Barry Bonds's. All right, pretty insane. Takes a level of commitment and dedication to doing that. Well, it turns out that some people really started taking to this. Richard Shank started his own hitting website, his own little hitting community, and he had some followers, people saying, yo, you're onto something. This is pretty interesting. And through an incredible confluence of events, he ends up working with some pro players, some minor leaguers who kind of are interested in Richard Shank and don't really care that he's a jerk, because professional baseball players aren't always the softest people around the edges, so they don't really mind that this guy is a bit gruff. That ultimately leads one of those players that he worked with in the minor leagues becomes an agent after his career. One of this agent's clients is Aaron Judge. Aaron Judge is really struggling in 2016. His agent goes to him and said, hey, Aaron Judge, I know this guy. I think he'll be able to help you, but I'm going to warn you, it's really weird what he's going to teach you. It's going to be completely different than anything you've ever heard from any coach ever. And the stuff Richard Shank teaches is very weird. He uses weird language. He has really weird drills involving PVC pipes and golf balls. And I can't even describe some of the stuff he has people do. I got to experience a hitting lesson with him, actually 2 of them. They're very weird. Would not recommend it. Would not recommend sending your child to Richard Shank. I haven't heard from him since the book ended, so I think I can now say that it's fine. But anyway, Aaron Judge goes to 5 days. He says, all right, I'll give this guy 5 days. I'll have an open mind. Aaron Judge, very nice guy. Very gentle soul for someone who's 6'8" and weighs 280 pounds and can probably punch you and kill somebody. He goes out to Arizona, spends 5 days with Richard Shank, and by God, it starts working. Aaron Judge says the ball's really coming off my bat hard. And he has, the incredible 2017 season after working with Richard Shank. So now Richard Shank feeling pretty good about himself. And that's when the skeletons start coming out of the closet. People started uncovering some of his old postings, things he used to say, things he still says on Twitter. He'll go on Twitter now and just lambaste people and criticize everybody. It's just scorched earth. Some pretty bad stuff. If you want, I won't quote him, but you go on his Twitter account, you could find it for yourself. So he's a very controversial figure, has not worked for everybody, but it worked for Aaron Judge.
And Jared, at least to your knowledge up to this point, you've avoided the scorn of Richard Shank on Twitter, or do we have to Google your name and Richard Shank together?
No, I think he sort of indirectly made it clear what he thinks about sports writers in general. And I think I'm at the top of the top list. Again, more saw how the saw is made. I have not heard a single peep from Richard Schenck since the book came out. I assume he has read it. You know, I was legitimately worried he might sue me, like because he's a bit of a loose cannon. Like I admit, I was like, what is this guy gonna do? Am I too hard on him? Have not heard from him. He's still doing his internet trolling. He has never been hired by a major league team, whereas many of the characters in my book have worked for major league teams. And a big part of why is just because he's too much of a loose cannon to really bring into a more professional environment.
But, you know, that kind of leads to my next point, Jared. And you know, we know, probably most of our audience recognizes that, you know, baseball tends to be a very conservative, tradition-bound sport. And yet, it would appear that the proponents of the revolution appear to have won. I think you noted that by the end of April last season, that 17 teams, which is more than half of the teams in the big league, had new hitting coaches. And private coaches now seem to be the rage. And maybe nothing is more emblematic of that than the fact that it's a Wallenbrock disciple, Robert Van Scoyoc, who you mentioned as someone who worked with JD. He is the hitting coach of the Los Angeles Dodgers. And correct me if I'm wrong, Jared, in his first game as hitting coach, didn't the Dodgers hit some like 8 home runs in the game?
The opening day last year, they hit 8 homers. It was an opening day record. I don't remember the exact number. It's right in the beginning of the book. They hit an insane amount of home runs. They had the best offense in baseball last year, so it worked out just fine.
Yeah, I think it was 8, but what that leads me to ask you though is, are we seeing the end of, you know, former big leaguers like say Jim Rice, who was a hitting coach here, Dwight Evans has been a hitting coach in the past, or Achille Davis? Are we seeing the end of former big leaguers becoming hitting coaches?
Yeah, it's a great question, and the short answer to me is absolutely not. No. And I'll explain why. I think to sort of understand what's going on, we have to go all the way back to 2003 in the publication of Moneyball, right? Moneyball, maybe the most famous baseball book ever written. It was incredibly influential. It really changed the whole industry. And Moneyball was about a lot of things, but one thing that Moneyball was about was the recognition, first by the A's and then by many other teams, that the way we were building baseball teams was wrong, was not as efficient and smart as it could be. And then suddenly there was a wave of people going into front offices that didn't have traditional baseball backgrounds. Guys like Andrew Friedman with the Dodgers, guys like Chaim Bloom with the Red Sox now, people that didn't play themselves. And it worked, and that became the trend. So what ended up happening, you know, all these years later? Those people who were once outsiders, who are now insiders, but were once outsiders, said, hey, why wouldn't that idea, why would we think that Major League Baseball as an industry, which had no idea sort of the power of some of these front office outsiders, is hiring the right people in the dugout? Why would that be? It doesn't make any sense. They probably aren't. There's probably a role for these outsider types in dugouts as well. So those one-time outsiders started looking for other outsiders to put in different positions, basically just moving it from the front office into the dugout. But nothing will ever replace experience. There really is incredible value to the experience of having been in Major League Baseball, which I think touches on the role of Major League coaches. They sort of serve 2 purposes. One of them is about teaching mechanics and helping players fix their swings, fix their pitching mechanics. But that's only a small part of the job. Actually, during the course of a Major League season where you're playing 162 games, there isn't really a lot of time to do wholesale changes on your swing, on your pitching mechanics. So what the job of these coaches also is, I think even more than teaching technique, is about helping players get through the grind. It's about being a psychologist, about helping players stay mentally where they need to be successful. And there is incredible value in that space of experience, people that have been through the grind, people that went through brutal Major League slumps and got out of it, people that understand how your body feels on August 25th after you've already played 110 games in a season. Now you're heading into a playoff race. Coaches who had gone through terrible seasons when it's now September and you have nothing to play for. How do you stay sharp? Those people always have value. The ones that are going to make it and have success as coaches today are ones who are willing, A, to collaborate, to have, every team now has 2 hitting coaches. It's just the way it is, sort of the hitting coach and the assistant hitting coach or co-hitting coaches, willing to collaborate and willing to be open-minded about what they don't know. Teams that are successful have coaches that come in with knowledge, and on both sides, the outsiders and the insiders, recognize what they could learn from the other. That's something the Dodgers have done incredibly well with their collection of guys like Robert Van Scoyoc, but also a guy like Brant Brown, who is a really good major league player, solid major league player, sort of a second hitting coach. Those 2 guys work together as a team and learn from each other. And every successful major league franchise now are ones that understand that you need to keep learning from each other and work in collaboration, not be opposing forces. And I think hopefully every team starts to realize that.
I mean, that to me, that almost sounds like the symmetry that had to be achieved between traditional scouting and data analysis in evaluating players. You know, toward the end of your book, Jared, you write that baseball faces what you call a reckoning. There's no doubt, you say, that baseball is smarter than it has ever been. The question is whether smarter means better or specifically more entertaining. With the rise in home runs, we've all seen it, there's been a huge spike in strikeouts and fewer balls are being put into play. Does baseball have a problem?
I really believe that this issue of sort of entertainment versus optimization is the single biggest existential question that baseball faces. I guess coronavirus is a big one too, but let's assume they get past that at some point. A sort of bigger, longer term picture. I really do believe the future of baseball in many ways rests on how they answer that question. Baseball is an entertainment product first and foremost. It really doesn't matter how smart it is if people are not enjoying what they're seeing on the field. The aesthetics of the game matter to me, and I think to a lot of fans. How the game feels is really important, sort of what they're seeing and how it makes them feel while watching it. And right now, what we have in baseball is a lot of home runs and a lot of strikeouts and not a lot of anything else. So sacrifice bunts and stolen bases are basically gone from the game probably forever to some extent. And what we have instead is essentially the pitcher and catcher playing a game of catch, and then occasionally it interrupted by a home run. And it's a lot of sitting around, it's a lot of waiting for something to happen and nothing really happening. And I don't blame any team for pursuing a team that is good at those things. You know why? Because the best way to win games is to hit a lot of home runs and don't let the other team put the ball in play. We could say whatever we want about pitching to contact. The reality is strikeouts are good. They're really good. Because when the ball's in play, weird things could happen. Ground balls scoot through the hole. Bloops could fall in front of outfielders. When you strike the guy out, you run none of those risks. There's a reason why every team wants strikeout pitchers and wants home run hitters. So that means it's the job of baseball, the entity with a capital B, to decide what they need to do if they think the game needs to be changed artificially. Other sports, the NBA and the NFL specifically, have been very aggressive through the years in making rule changes exclusively designed to make the game more fun. And it's had an incredible impact on those games. People realize in the NFL, you know what people like? Long bombs down the field. So let's figure out a way to make rules that encourage quarterbacks throwing bombs down the field and not 2-yard runs up the middle. In the NBA, it's, you know what people like? Guys running sort of freely and being able to move and drive. So we're not going to, we're going to call these ticky-tack fouls so that defenders don't do that anymore. So players could sort of dribble and do incredible feats of athleticism. That's what people like. And I think baseball has to decide if it wants to do something like that. It has not. It has been unwilling to. It's a much more traditional sport. Baseball's attitude has always been, well, the game will figure itself out. It always adjusts. And often that's been the case. But there's a history of baseball making changes like this. We go back to 1969. Pitching had gotten so far ahead of hitting. So what do? They lower the mounds that hitters have a chance. I really do believe that here, as we sit here in 2020, with pitchers throwing 100 miles an hour and breaking balls that move in ways that balls were never designed to move before. Now, in this particular season, 50% of pitches roughly are breaking balls because they're really hard to hit. At some point, you wonder if baseball has to go, we need to find a way to incentivize contact, incentivize a little more action in the games. I don't think time of game is the problem. I have no problem watching a 3-hour baseball game. If the game is moving, if it feels brisk, you watch an old game from the 70s, the biggest thing I noticed watching clips of old games, guys went up there swinging. They went up there trying to put the ball in play. At bats were like 2 pitches long. Now the average at bat is 4 pitches. 4 average plate appearance has set a record for most pitches per plate appearance every single year for like a decade. Because the strategy is sit there and wait for that perfect pitch. And if I strike out, it's fine. Maybe they'll make these changes, maybe they won't. But I do think we have to decide, what do we want baseball to not just look like, but feel like as we watch the game.
So, Jared, before I turn things over to Maddie and the audience questions, you know I'm going to circle back to that kid at Scarsdale High and his holy grail of trying to rediscover his swing. Now, you actually took some lessons with guys like, Doug Latta and Bobby Tewksbury and all. So you had a chance to put it to the test in Yankee Stadium, no less. Tell us that story.
So, but I didn't know this when I was starting to work on my book, but what I realized at some point early in the process was, hey, there's the media baseball game every year between the New York media and the Boston media. It's a great tradition that unfortunately didn't get to happen this year. Hopefully it returns next year, where the New York baseball writers and the Boston baseball writers play a home and home series, 1 game at Yankee Stadium, 1 game at Fenway Park. I've had the privilege of playing in both, and it is an incredible thrill. One of the most fun things I've gotten to do in my career is get to play a baseball game, especially at Fenway Park. That has blew my mind because it's Fenway Park, you know? So anyway, I realized at some point, hey, I have access to these great coaches. I bet they'll help me out. They'll take pity on me and, you know, give me some lessons. So over the course of the book, I said, let me get in the cage. Let me do a little first person reporting here and see what you're really teaching these guys. And I learned very quickly that I'm not going to sign a free agent contract anytime soon. I think once I turned 30, my body just said I can't do certain things anymore. I just don't have like the upper body strength to do some of the things that are required to have a good swing. But I picked up some things. I got to get into a cage with Bobby Tewksbury and measure my exit velocity, and I was getting it up there to like 80 miles an hour. Maybe could have gone up to 85 with a little more work. Not quite Aaron Judge 115, but, you know, getting there. So in the book, I weave these stories in. I had some first-person sections where I'm talking about my experiences, all with the quest of having success in the media baseball game. And the one I write about in the book, I believe, was the 2019 game, perhaps, maybe 18. I think it was 19. And I remember right before my at-bat, I was talking a lot throughout the process with Tyler Kepner of the New York Times, great baseball writer for the New York Times, who had just written a book himself the year before. So we talked a lot about the process, and he was really supportive. And you know, I was telling him, hey, I gotta have success in this game. And he said, Sky, get the ball in the air. No matter what happens, you cannot hit a ground ball in this at bat. You have to get the ball in the air. And you know, I got up there, got a pitch, a good pitch to hit, and I actually hit it really hard. Hit a line drive in the straightaway center field. Off the bat, I said, this ball is going to be absolutely scorched. It felt really good, and the center fielder didn't move a single step. It was right directly at him. I literally don't think he moved a single step. So I was like, wasn't feeling too good about it. But I very vividly remember next inning after that at bat, I went out, I was playing first base, and we're doing warm-ups for the next inning, and the umpire behind me just came out and said, hey, just so you know, that was the hardest hit ball of the whole game. And that was all I needed to hear. I considered that success.
There you go. Jared Diamond had his Walter Mitty moment. Hey, Jared, you've been great. Thank you so much. It's very fascinating conversation. I imagine that our audience has a number of questions. If you'll indulge us and stick around, I'm going to.
See, we got a bunch of questions in there.
over to Maddie Webster, who's our doctoral candidate at Boston University, who has become our maestro of the Q&A session. Maddie, take it away.
Well, thank you so much, Jared and Gordon as well. I personally learned a lot, and clearly everyone else did too, and they had many questions. So we'll start off with a question that I think like 5 or 6 people had, and Saul from Newton Center articulated it first. So we'll go with Saul's wording. He wants to know, so JD Martinez mastered the art of hitting home runs using theories like those described in your book, but despite still being in his prime, has seen a sharp decline in production this year. To what do you attribute this and similar falls? Could it be the loss of regular routine due to COVID? What do you think?
Yeah, the mystery of JD Martinez in 2020. He has really had a tough year. So I have a couple answers to that. A simple one and a more complicated one. The simple one is this is completely not scientific and makes no actual sense, but this is a very weird season. So my attitude about the 2020 season is if you do really well, that's awesome. And I consider that to be perfectly legitimate. But if you really don't do well, it's only because it was a weird short season. It doesn't really count. I know that doesn't really matter to Red Sox fans right now who see this guy hitting like under 200. But I do think in seriousness, a real reason that he's struggling with, and he's talked about this, he's been open about it, is that they took away a lot of access to video. JD Martinez is a obsessive watcher of video. During games, after at-bats, he would go and watch his swings and make tweaks in games. Well, he's not allowed to do that this year. It's sort of a response to not COVID, but actually in many ways a response to the Astros sign stealing scandal that obviously dominated the offseason, which feels like 100 million years ago, but was a really big deal last winter. They've made some rules of limiting the video that's available. I think JD Martinez is struggling with that. I also think, look, he is actually getting older. JD Martinez is, he's approaching his mid-30s. I wouldn't agree that he's in his prime anymore because he kind of got a late start because he had such a slow beginning to his career. I don't think he's done. I still think he's going to be able to figure this out. But certainly 2020 was sort of just, it was a lost cause for him. And look, who knows? I don't know. This is just me speculating. Maybe we'll find out he was dealing with an injury this whole year, because that's often a reason why someone would uncharacteristically struggle is they're battling some injury they're not talking about. So we'll see what happens this offseason into next year.
Thank you for answering the most pressing question. Next up, a question from Peter. He wants to know, how are pitchers responding in order to counter swing kings?
So I've seen a few things. The big one was sort of the rise of like the high fastball. Throughout the 90s and into the 2000s and in that first decade of this century, pitching was all about sinker balls and sliders. Everything was down. Everything was down, 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 down. So there was sort of a natural response to try to sort of golf it, to swing up, to counteract all those sinkers and sliders. That was really the trend. It was very east-west. You think of a guy like Greg Maddux or Tom Glavine, where everything was sort of using the east-west part of the plate. So there has been some response, right, to elevate pitches, go more north-south. We've seen that a lot. And some pitchers have had success with that. It has not really worked for a guy like JD Martinez or Aaron Judge or Justin Turner or Josh Donald, some of these guys who've had great success. But really the biggest thing that pitching is doing to counteract everything is just throw more breaking balls and go away from their fastballs. It's sort of a cliche to say that no matter how hard you throw, eventually people catch up to your fastball. So now, like I said earlier, pitchers are throwing 50% breaking balls this year, and it is a real struggle for everybody. Hitters are really struggling with the fact that now 1 out of every 2 pitchers is a slider that moves in insane ways. So that's really the big thing. To me, pitching is still so far ahead of hitting, and hitting is just doing its best to catch up. But yeah, between more breaking balls and the high fastball really been the 2 biggest advents we've seen.
Thanks. So this next one, 2 questions in one here. So the first part is from Alex. He says, or she, for a player who makes a swing change, how long does it typically take them to get comfortable with it? Did you find it took a certain number of games, ABs, reps, etc.? And then connected to that, Brian wants to know, do you think there's any fear of failure from a player trying to improve their skills?
Yeah, it's really amazing. Like for a guy like for JD Martinez, for Justin Turner, for the people in the book, they did everything they did in one intensive offseason. JD Martinez spent one offseason with Craig Wallenbrog working with him regularly, and that was all it took. Same with Justin Turner when he went to the Dodgers in 2014. And I know that sounds hard to believe. How could they do all that in one offseason? But actually, it didn't shock me that much. I think what we have to remember about these guys is that they already have the abilities in them. These are world-class athletes with bodies that operate in ways that we can't even imagine. So when all of a sudden they're now optimizing how they use their body, it doesn't actually shock me that they're able to very quickly see success. It's like they were swinging with one arm for their whole life, and suddenly someone said, "Hey, you have another arm that you could hit with. Imagine how much better you'll do." So it doesn't shock me that much, but there's no question the fear part is real, because if you're a guy like JD Martinez or you're Justin Turner or you're Josh Donaldson, if this doesn't work, you're done, because you're going to now go to spring training after making big changes, and you're going to be swinging in a way that's going to look really weird to your coaches, and it's going to be something that the people that are evaluating you are going to say is not going to work. And I had many players over the course of the book tell me the fear they felt going to that spring training is they knew that if it didn't work, that was it. They were not going to get another chance. They were going to get cut because they'd be viewed as like uncoachable or too sort of independently minded because they were doing something that was sort of not in the prescribed program. In the case of JD Martinez, he got cut in 2014 after coming back to the Astros that first spring training with his new swing. He got cut in March of that year and ended up having to sign a minor league contract with the Tigers and sort of prove himself. Fortunately, had success. But yeah, that fear is real, because if it doesn't work, that for guys like this, there is no other chance. And being deemed uncoachable when you're sort of a young or fringy player is a death sentence in professional baseball.
Maybe one more, Maddie?
Oh my gosh, we have so many. Okay, let me, okay, well, we'll go with this one because I think it's a good one to end on. So Billy wants to know, Jared, if you had to pick the best swing ever, who would you choose, and who has the best swing currently in the MLB?
The best swing ever. I mean, look, I'm going to show my my age bias right now, so forgive me. But the prettiest swing that I've seen in my life, and the one that I could just watch all day, every day, it's always going to be Ken Griffey Jr. I mean, that guy's swing was just a work of art. It was just so amazing. It was so smooth. It was up. It was so powerful. I don't know what it is about. A lot of lefties have this, but I think Ken Griffey Jr. was just the best. And I'm sure there's many baseball fans who are much older than I am that will tell me that I'm totally wrong. I just had to have been alive in the 50s or 60s or 70s, and I totally believe that. But for me, it's Ken Griffey Jr. And for now, best swing now, I think there's a few people that jump to mind. I've always loved Robinson Cano's swing. I think it's similar to Griffey's, that lefty, very smooth, looks so effortless off the bat. And, it looked like he was sort of on the decline, but he's having a great year this year. So maybe he's not done after all. And on the total other end of the spectrum, I am endlessly fascinated by Bryce Harper's swing. It is not pretty. It is violent and vicious. And I don't think you would ever teach exactly anyone to swing like Bryce Harper, but there's something very primal about just him swinging as hard as he could every single time. I just find it very sort of interesting to watch because it's just so aggressive every single time.
Ladies and gentlemen, Jared Diamond. And Jared, I know I won't need to encourage you more than once, but go ahead, hold up the book. The title is Swing Kings Inside the Home Run Revolution. You can go to our website, FenwayParkWriters.org, and order the book directly there. We have a link to Frugal Books, which is a local independent bookstore in Roxbury. And otherwise, you can go to your favorite bookseller. Jared, you've been terrific, enlightening. We really appreciate it. I want to thank some of our other sponsors, including the Bo Sox Club, the Woo Sox and the Pawtucket Red Sox. Who am I forgetting? The Red Sox Foundation, the special friends of George Mitrovich, the Blowhards in New York. Jared, you've got to go speak to the Blowhards. If you're not familiar with the Blowhards, it's a Red Sox fan club in New York. And I do want to mention that our next event, we've already scheduled it. It's October 21st, and our guest will be Joan Ryan, the longtime columnist in San Francisco. She now works for the San Francisco Giants. She's a prolific author, and her new book is called Intangibles, in which she takes a deep dive into team chemistry, which of course has applications not only in sports, but in business and families and everything. You know, is there such a thing as team chemistry? So we're very excited about that program and having Joan, and we'll have further details on our website in the coming days. So I thank you all for your attention. I thank you all for your great questions. I want to acknowledge the members of the Writers Steering Committee, Paul Bogosian, the immortal Dick Flavin, Donna Cohen, who you haven't seen on the screen tonight, and I again am Gordon Eads. Thank you all, and good night, Jared.
Thank you so much. This is fun.
All right.
Check out the book.